Hello, my lovely patrons. This is Dina and welcome to a new tutorial. I've heard your requests and I wanted to make another countryside, garden, lots of flowers and greenery type of tutorials for this month, and I really hope that you like the video and like the painting that I chose. I did use a few references for this painting, which I will have linked below in the YouTube video description along all of my used products, but they will be also added to the Patreon post where this was as well. So just wanted to add those in because I did use them to kind of get used to this sort of landscape and the composition, but I did end up also changing quite a lot of things up from that reference. So it's not really the same kind of painting and it does feel different from that reference, if that makes sense. Well, yeah, I wanted this whole painting to be mostly just, a nice little pathway, and then you can see some of the things behind the fence and the gate that is in the painting. Just like this nice, airy, beautiful summer's day garden, and I just really enjoyed how this turned out in the end, even though I have to say, painting it was a little bit of a struggle, but I hope that I managed to make this video for you in a way where it doesn't really feel that way, hopefully at least. But I started by first sketching the elements in my painting. I wanted to mainly focus on just like where I wanted to add in the pathway and where the bushes around it are. And then I sketched the whole fence pretty well just to kind of add in all of the shapes that I could paint later. And then I sketched some of the tree trunks. And after that, I did add in a layer of underpainting with this watery orangey gouache tone to start off the painting with a warm underpainting that could overall make the painting a little bit more warm and just cozy and inviting in tone, if that makes sense. But after I was done with my underpainting layer, I went in and started finally painting this whole scenery, and I wanted to start with the background first. So in the top section of the painting, we have some of this kind of moody grayish blue color of the sky showing through, and there's this bigger area in the center where you can actually see that part more, but there's also this color behind some of the trees and leaves. So I did want to extend this color quite far into the top of this painting, so I would not have to again add this color later after I have already painted the trees. So I was just adding this color to the top of the painting, and then I wanted to focus on that area of ground that's behind the fence, or just above the fence, basically underneath the sky. So I wanted to add this very hazy little gradient of like this very muted green to kind of make it look like there's this misty field, like this endless field in the back, and you cannot really see the horizon line really that sharply, if that makes sense. So I mixed in some more olive green tones on my palette into that bluish color of the sky, and then I made that color more vibrant and a little bit darker when we went kind of underneath that area. So for example, that section that you can see kind of through the fence, I wanted to add in much more olive green tones, so it would just be a little bit more vibrant and dark as well. And I did also want to blend the sky color into that green of the ground a little bit more, just to make it more seamless and smooth. And again, it would kind of take that like hazy and misty look a little bit further when there was not a sharp line there. But I have to say that this sketchbook is definitely not the best for blending any colors or like making smooth gradients. I have definitely learned that. It's not me being bad at gradients, it's this notebook really not, giving me that sort of help with that. So I often feel like whenever I have to make these sort of, paintings and these sort of elements where I have to kind of blend things together a little bit more, things get like my brushes always pick up much more paint than normally, so it's always a little bit of a struggle. So I kind of had to add in more pigment to do a better blend there. But anyway, then I started painting the ground between the bushes on the sides, and I have to say painting the greenery in this painting was so incredibly tricky. I don't know why. I feel like honestly it wasn't, just that the painting subject itself was tricky. I think that honestly just this day I was like not really having I was having hard time getting past the ugly phase of the painting and just like saying like it's good enough and I'll start to add in the details now, because that's when it always turns out much better. But I was just really trying to make it look better with even these like very first layers. But I made the, like in the pathway, basically I made the left side a little bit darker with more black and olive green mixed into it, and then more yellow mixed into it to make the right side a little bit lighter, so there would just be a little bit more dimension. And when I started working on the bushes next to it, I basically made this sort of sketch already where I wanted to kind of map out different sections for these bushes next to the pathway. I kind of wanted to make these like almost like circular elements into the painting, so I would kind of know where each of these bushes and these spots of greenery would start and end, if that makes sense. And I wanted to always make the bottom a little bit darker. So basically it just means that I added in some more like dimension and some sort of distinction between these bushes. So for example, on the right side you can see that in the bottom we have this like bush where we have some of that darker olive green and black color in the bottom, and then on the top we have a little bit more lighter tone. But then again, after we have this other bush that again has that darker in the bottom and then some more lighter tones in the top, and then again behind that we have again that same darker and lighter tones there, so we can get some more distinction between these areas of greenery here, just to kind of differentiate each bush, because there may be different flowers altogether and maybe different plants that someone has planted there. So I just kind of wanted to make some sort of distinction and some sort of color variation there to make it not be just one uniform blob of color. To the bushes in the back, kind of underneath the trees I'm adding later, I wanted to add a bit more darker tones into the bottoms and overall just make them less, less detailed, even though I did add quite a lot of detail, but I just kind of wanted to make sure that texture looked a little bit different compared to the bushes and the greenery in the bottom of the painting. I wanted to add more of these grassy details here in the bottom, so I wanted to kind of make the back of the these bushes that I'm working on right now, I just wanted to make them a little bit more dark and like bushy and messy and loose, if that makes sense. But also I'm kind of going ahead of myself right now because we're still working on the first details. But I went back and forth adding much more darker tones and then going back and just kind of blending that with lighter tones. Again, just like I wasn't really sure how much I wanted there to be this like smoothness versus these more rough edges in this painting. So I really had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do with that, and that's why I think that this first the base layers took me so much longer than normally. So yeah, you can definitely do all of this much quicker than I did, and I think that you don't have to work on perfecting everything as long as I did, because I think that overall just going in with a pretty dark tone and then leaving it as that, I think that should be pretty good. But I think that also my colors were drying a little bit more on the lighter side, whereas I wanted to add in much more darker tones, so I wasn't really getting that sort of contrast that I wanted. So I pretty much just ended up going with some actual black tone to some of the shadows that I wanted to add in this painting, because it was really not building itself in the way that I wanted. Into the misty field in the back, I also did want to add a few more details. So I basically made a little hazy and light colored tree line there as well, just to kind of make it look more interesting and have some sort of definition and shape in there as well, because it did look quite unrealistic and just like a weird blob of color. So I did want to add some sort of definition and some sort of detail there to just kind of pull it all together and just make it more interesting looking. But after I was, I guess, decently okay with all of the colors that I had added into my painting, I just thought that it's time to start adding in the details, because this is not going to magically turn out amazing unless I do this part. So even if I'm not super happy with this right now, I just have to endure and paint the next part so it will get much better. And that's exactly what happened. Even though I don't think that this is like one of my favorite paintings by any means, I still quite like it. So I was happy to finally start adding in some details into this painting. So I mixed in some slightly lighter color than the very black that I use here in the bottom of this left section here to start making some of these barely visible grasses into this bush here. So I wanted to kind of make it more grassy on the like very left like bottom side of the bush, and then I wanted to start adding in some more leafy shapes to the top. And I wanted to do this because obviously these bushes here in the bottom are much closer to us than in the back. So I just wanted to add in some more of these distinct shapes into the bushes here. So I did add in some layered greenery going from that slightly darker tone into that very light and yellowish white tone on the top of the bush, just to kind of make it look more dimensional and add in some interesting texture. I have talked about like layering greenery so much in my past tutorials because many of my videos have been all about greenery. So if you are someone that would like to learn more about that, I'm not going to go super maybe in depth. I don't know. We'll see. This does take quite a while, so maybe I will go in depth. But if you want to like overall just learn something new about that and like maybe get back to the basics, I have a gouache basics video on my Patreon here. You can find it either on the tutorials or in the real-time collections of videos here. And basically in that we'll just go over, you know, the basic qualities of gouache, and we're also going to be painting some greenery textures. And I think that that is super helpful for any sort of painting like this, because we're exactly doing that in this painting. We have these different textures within the bushes here. In this painting we have some of those leafy textures, more grassy textures, and more of those bushy like sort of I don't know, messy bushy textures. And I think that that video would be super helpful because we are basically just combining all of those things into one painting. And I tried to make it in a pretty simplistic way, so I'm not really spending a whole lot of time on this part, even though it's a very important part. But I think that overall I just had fun just kind of combining those textures and those like greenery details in this painting. So for example, on the bottom right side I went with like these bigger blades of grass with these taller blades of grass in the bottom, and then I made a little bit of smaller daintier grasses in the next bush, and then I went in for that like more bushy and wild look for the ones in the top, and again then I went for those leafy textures in the one on the left. So I tried to kind of combine all of those kinds of different textures to make it look interesting and natural and like they exist in actual nature. So I really had a lot of fun just like doing that part of this painting. I did also want to add some more very small little textures and batches of grass into the pathway itself. So when I was working on the pathway, I did add in some random little little patterns and textures in there with like my small brush, making these little dotted elements and just kind of dragging them to the sides, or making like tiny little grassy strokes there as well. I wanted to add in some grass, but I didn't want to make them super long so they would look weird, because this is not meant to be like, this is maybe you know, a part of this whole field that has been mowed so you can actually walk on it. So I wanted to make sure that I'm adding these very short little blades of grass into the middle section so it would just make a little bit more sense. But overall it was a very fun process of just combining this greenery and just having fun with it. I wasn't really working on this in any precise way. But I guess I'm going to be talking about layering a little bit more since I've done it so many times already in my past videos. But I do think that here it's very important because we're doing that quite a lot. So usually, as you can see, I'm starting these blobs of bushes in this way of making the bottom a little bit darker and the top much lighter in tone. And when I'm starting to add those textures, whatever it is, green, grass, like these more bushy textures, whatever you want to call them, I'm starting with darker colors first, but they're still always lighter than the original base color, which is again that darker in the bottom and lighter in the top. So I'm starting to add that tone into the bushes first, again going with that same texture that we have already said, whatever it is that you choose, but we're gonna go with this very subtle first layer, and then every single time when we're adding in more layers and we want to just make it more bushy and more wild and more like in the nature, I'm adding in more lighter tones into that mix. So I'm basically lightening it every single layer so that in the top we have these very nice and light colors of of greenery that will reflect the light a little bit more and just feel like they're more in the natural light and sunlight. And that will just create a nice sense of depth in your paintings, and it will make them much more 3D and realistic when you do that, instead of just adding in this very light color from the get-go. You would just kind of gradually take it there and make it more interesting to look at. That is a very simple way of putting it, but obviously there's more things about it, but I think that that's like a pretty good thing to understand at this point, and I think that you're gonna get very far with that. But when I was decently happy with the greenery itself, I started to add in some flowers on top, and this was definitely just my creativity taking the wheel and going wherever it wanted, because I was not really thinking about what I wanted to add here all that much. I was just doing whatever. So again, I'm working with the smaller detail brush, and I will link a similar one below if you want to check this out. I don't have this exact link because this is from my local store, and I don't think you can get these from any international stores. But anyway, I was working on the bushes in the back, and I wanted to make sure that I'm making these flowers and these shapes very tiny and less precise in that way. Like, I'm not making them any sort of actual flower shapes. I'm just basically working on making these little blobs into the backs of the bushes here with this white color, so that they make sense that they're in the back and you cannot see them as well, if that makes sense. I'm making them also lighter in the tops of the bushes, whereas I'm adding in more black and brown tones into that color mix when I'm working on those more shadowy parts of the bushes, just to make it look more dimensional and make sure that again we have that sort of depth in our painting. I lost maybe a few minutes of footage when I started painting the flowers in the bush underneath the one that I was working on right there. So I started adding these more purpley flowers that kind of grow up a little bit more, so they're not as ambiguously shaped, so they just actually have some sort of shape in them. Whatever flowers these are, I don't know. So I just made a like purple base color for them. Again, you can see that shape is like this like pointing upwards, and then when I was done with that base color, I started lightening them by adding more white into that magenta and ultramarine deep mix. So I made this like more light purple mix and started adding that onto the tops of the flowers that I just made and onto the left side. So now basically one side of this flower was more lighter in tone, and it was just like more detailed, and then I went in and also lightened that color even more and added even a smaller little highlight onto that same spot on the top and on the left side of the flower, and also darkened the bottom a little bit more because I did not feel like it looked dark enough, especially in the bottom where we had more of that darker green. But you know, you can add any sort of flowers you like. You can go for like flowers that you have actually seen. I think that this would be a fun way to include some flowers that are maybe in your own garden, or just overall working on some fun flower shapes and flower species that you like. But I just wanted to add a few little flowers here that I thought would look good. And of course, you know me, and I love daisies, so I added a few daisies into the bottom left side, and I made again some of them more white in tone, whereas for the other ones that are more in the shadow, I did mix some more black and brown into them, just to make it look again more dimensional and have that depth, and have some of them less lightened by sunlight, if that makes sense. I also did add a few of those red blobs there, but I'm now covering them up because I did not really like the look of red flowers in this painting. I feel like they maybe made it a little bit darker than I wanted. So I kind of, after that, realized that I would like to want yellow and purple and white flowers, and I think that that made it look very nice and warm in tone, instead of having any sort of colors that were kind of fighting against each other. I don't know. I just felt like that looked so much better in my eyes, so I just kind of wanted to stick to those three colors. But I also did want to add a few of these bright yellow blobs everywhere, and this is definitely a painting where you can really go as wild as you want. You can add in so many flowers to each section. I think that there's obviously maybe a limit where it starts to look a little bit weird, but I think that we didn't get there yet with this painting. So definitely go and add in however many flowers you want and different tones that kind of fit into that same sort of vibe that you're gonna go for. Obviously, if you want to add a lot of different colors, I think that that would look good too. But definitely if you are choosing a few, make sure that those colors really go together pretty well, so you don't have a weird mixture of colors. But as you can see, I added in more of those like pastel yellow colors onto the bottom right side. I wasn't really thinking about any sort of specific shape I wanted to go for, but I sort of thought about like maybe buttercups when I was adding in these blobs, but I did not want to make them super distinct or interesting like in terms of the shape. I just wanted to add in color, which maybe I should have gone for something that looked more like an actual flower like the daisies here, but I just didn't really want to think about that too much and went with a very random shape there. And also onto the top of that, I did want to add in more purple, so I just made some random little purple flower shapes, maybe more like ones that have some sort of petal shapes, but again, I just wanted to keep everything very simple and not really that interesting in shape. Later on, when I was more done with the painting overall, I did want to add some more purple flowers next to the gate and onto the bushes in the back as well, just to kind of tie everything together a little bit more. So I definitely thought that it was very interesting and important in the end to kind of add in some more of these shapes into the whole bushes and onto all of the little elements, just to have more of this like unity between all of the shapes and the greenery and the bushes. And I think that that was definitely a good choice to add in more of that purple there as well. But before we go there, I wanted to finish working on the bushes here underneath the trees, and basically I just wanted to add in some more definition onto the edges of them. I didn't want to make them look super sharp and detailed because some of the bushes in the bottom were much more ambiguous, but I did want to add some more shapes onto the edges just to make it look like they were actually like actual leaves and some sort of actual greenery instead of these very random and kind of super big and I don't know, more and less distinct blobs. I just wanted to add some more definition there so that it would look a little bit more realistic, but I did also add in some more of those like bushy shapes there as well before I started working on the tree trunks itself. And in some of these reference photos that I was looking at, they had this like bigger tree. I think it was like on the left side or something, but I just wanted to kind of add that onto the right side, kind of curving almost on top of that entire top of the painting to make it look more balanced and interesting to look at, because obviously we still have quite a lot of space here in the top of this painting that did not have any color yet outside of that sky color, of course, and I just wanted to kind of push it together or have this sort of feel that this whole painting was kind of pushed together a little bit more, where you would have this more like a clean empty space only with the sky and the misty field in the back, and I thought that that looked really pretty. So when I started adding in these leaves and these brush strokes into the leaves and these treetops, I think that it already started looking so much better and the whole painting was definitely coming together. I wanted to make those branches of the trees very much just like bending over the middle top section of the painting, and wanted to just overall add in a lot of different branches and make it look more crowded and just kind of more messy. And I was also adding in some more highlights and shadows onto the tree trunks itself, and I kind of made the side of the tree a little bit lighter that was closer to the middle point of the painting. So basically on the bigger tree trunk on the right side, I kind of lightened the left side of the tree trunk and made the right side a little bit darker in tone. Also, I know that it's a little bit tricky understanding what I'm doing with the leaves overall. I think that these kinds of trees that I'm working on right now and making the foliage is very tricky for me even. So I always kind of get a little bit nervous when I have to do this part because I feel like it's very close. Like the line is very blurred between having it look good and totally messing it up, and I'm always scared that I'm completely messing it up, but I'm actually happy with how it turned out. And I would definitely recommend you to watch the real-time video if you need some more help in creating organic and realistic looking greenery for trees. But overall, what I did was adding in these more ambiguous blobs first with a filbert brush that basically helps you just to add the colors into the spots where you want them. And then when I was done with like overall adding in those darker tones into the areas where the leaves were more dense and there were overall more of these green tones in that spot, and then adding in those lighter tones into the center of the painting and to the edges of all of my greenery little patches, if that makes sense. I think that then the important thing was to start breaking those random circular blobs that I had now added with my filbert brush, and I started using a smaller brush, kind of adding in these smaller leaves to the edges of those blobs so they would actually look like bunch of leaves. So they would start looking like these little dense areas where we have a lot of leaves overlapping each other and going to all different directions instead of just random green paint. And that's pretty much what I did. I was adding these leaves to the edges, pretty much doing the similar thing as I did with the bushes underneath the trees itself, but I was also adding in these lighter tones overall everywhere too, within the like darker, more dense areas of the greenery as well. So we have obviously a lot of those blobs. So again, I was kind of breaking that sort of shape there as well, just making sure that we have some of these pretty much working on those same sort of shapes as I did for those more bushy bushes. I don't know what else to call it than bushy, but working on those similar shapes and just adding them to some parts within that foliage in the trees to make sure that while overall we didn't have all that much detail in it, there were still little specks and little areas in it that made it look like leaves. Overall, I think that many people are focusing too much on how to paint a tree instead of how to create shapes and textures within this area of my painting to mask it looking like a tree. And I think that overall that is a very good thing to kind of put your mind into, and I think that overall I was surprised by how well this turned out. But after I was done adding in some more of these very tiny small little ambiguous shapes for flowers underneath the flowers in that in those bushes, I wanted to start working on the fence itself. And obviously now that we have all of the other things done, this is definitely still a pretty nerve-wracking step because this is going to be kind of where your eyes will focus on in this painting. I still think that after I had done all of those bushes and really struggled and painted that tree that I was really nervous about, this for some reason just felt really easy, especially since I had already sketched it pretty well beforehand and I had all of those edges still uncolored, so I knew where to add in the colors. So this felt almost like working on a coloring book. So what I did with the fence is that I made the colors brown first of all, but I made them much more dark and added in more of this red and black tone into the bottom of the fence and to the planks, I guess, on the underside of the fence, and then onto the top and onto all those parts that were higher up. I added in this more lighter brown tone and just made it look more dimensional and interesting that way. Not really doing all that many details. I didn't really add in any sort of like wood patterns into it. I just basically wanted to make sure that it had color variation and the top was just overall lighter and the bottom was darker. I did add in a few of these like highlighted lines there onto the posts and onto the top of them, but it was pretty minimalistic, painting process overall with the fence. I just darkened the greenery underneath it and added a few more of those grassy little textures on top of the fence, kind of grasses growing over that bottom portion of the fence, and just again added some more of those purple flowers next to it. But that is pretty much all that I did with this painting, and while it was a struggle, I can look at it now and be very proud of it, and I really love how it turned out, and I hope that you really like this video too. I hope that this was something that you really enjoyed watching, because I do know that many of you really like this sort of sceneries, and I would absolutely love to paint more of them. So if this is really something that you would like to see, like even in winter months, even in, a few months from now, just let me know and I will definitely paint more of these kinds of sceneries because I do also enjoy them so much. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you had fun as always. And especially if you ended up recording this yourself, I hope that you had fun most importantly. Thank you so much for watching this video and thank you for being a patron. Bye.